Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
they sell more advertisements to people who do live streams than people who don't. And what that means is it just it keeps the audience engaged. I don't know what their their algorithm behind that or anything, but it's kind of interesting actually how that works.
You still see.
All right, so I got you. Cool. So we are now live, Mike. Let me just hold on just a second. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do this right here and put that over there. All right, cool. So let's see if we have. Wait, hold on one second. Let's get this organized. There we go. All right, cool. All right, so all right, folks. So we Mike Edesess joins us again here, and this is gonna be fun. So we're just gonna talk politics, anything that comes up, and it's not. It's not like that. Just be interesting to see what other people's points of view are without calling people racist or without bullying people like I think people are doing last night. For the record, Michael, I did not watch the debate last night. I just don't care. So I mean, I care about the election, but the debate is all.
I watched it.
And yeah. I've hey, okay, so hey, Jill is here as one of my moderators. So good. So Jill, if people start getting stupid, just nuke them. Michael, just real quick for the audience who may or may not know you, in my industry, you're very well known. In other industries, i.e., everybody else other than financial planning, might not be familiar with your background. So just, a brief intro of who you are and everything, if you don't mind. Where are you calling from? Or where are you coming from?
Well, I happen to be in Hong Kong. I mean, this is, I've lived here for 10 years. I never would have expected to live here. Before that, I mainly lived in the mountains of Colorado. So this is about as opposite as you can get, except for the curious fact that Hong Kong is the best city in the world for hiking. This is, nobody realizes this, but we're 40% of the land in Hong Kong is preserved mountainous land. They're not high mountains like in Colorado, but it's very rugged with trails and beautiful coastline. The air is not as wonderful as in Colorado, but that's really the only thing that they have in common.
Is there smog in Hong Kong, or what's the
no? The air is pretty good now, and it's just gotten better and better. They put scrubbers on the coal-fired power plants. They're phasing out coal-fired power plants. It's 25% nuclear energy, and all the because it's sort of a high-price city. Yeah. The manufacturing all moved out, so it generates none of its own pollutants, and it all moved to Shenzhen, which is just over the border to the mainland, and then that generated a lot of pollution, which drifted over to Hong Kong. But that now even that's gotten too high priced, so the manufacturing has moved further inland in mainland China. So we really get very little. The air is mostly quite good here, but it's very, very humid. So you don't see the sun is not like a laser beam like it is in Colorado. It's you hardly ever see the moon. You see very few stars, but it's mainly because of the humidity and the clouds and so forth. So my background, well, I have a PhD in mathematics, pure mathematics, which means totally abstract math, and I still identify with that, even though I haven't really been in the pure math academic field for many years. But I know math very well. I feel like that's what I know best, and my critiques of a lot of things in finance are based on my knowledge of math, which is frankly much better than that of almost all of the people who call themselves financial engineers and financial, mathematical finance people, and they produce stuff that just appalls me. But anyway, but then
that's what I love about you, and you're not afraid to call them out either. That's what I love. Is like
yeah. So this is part of my work, is I write things about that. I don't really. It's not really paid work, but I write about that.
Right.
I got into I went to work right after getting my PhD in mathematics. I decided I wanted to work in this so-called real world. I didn't expect to work in finance, but somebody said, "Oh, why don't you go interview with this company?" It was A.G. Becker, which was a brokerage firm, but had the reputation of being the most, um, technically savvy, which it wasn't. So they hired me, sent me to go, work with their Myron Scholes, who they had hired as a consultant, but didn't really do anything. These things are window dressing, and I worked in that field for a few years, and frankly couldn't stand it. So I decided what I wanted to do was work in solar energy and moved to Colorado. And lo and behold, there was this research institution starting in Colorado, which is now called NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I had a job there for a few years, but during the Reagan administration, the funding was cut, the price of oil went down, the interest in solar just kind of went down. So I wound up back doing things like writing computer programs in the basically as what they called in Colorado a lone eagle, somebody who just works out of his house up in the mountains. And they were in the in the finance field, investment management field. So that I did that. Then I helped start a company called Lockwood Financial Group in 1995. It was sold in 2002 to Bank of New York, merged into Pershing, so it's now sort of continues as part of Pershing. But then I was asked to, while I did these other things, I would always volunteer to teach a course at a university. And so I taught a number of different courses. I taught mainly to learn the subject because there's no better way to learn. One of the things I taught was environmental economics, and that's why I'm in Hong Kong, because they needed at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology 10 years ago, they needed somebody to teach environmental economics. I had taught it. They asked me to come and do it. I said okay, and I've stayed and kicked around at universities here.
You met your wife there too, right?
Yeah, met my wife here.
She was on. She made an appearance last time. Remember that?
Yeah. I asked her not to make an appearance this time. And maybe she could. I don't know.
Yeah. All is welcome, Michael. All is welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so I'm now officially an adjunct professor at HKUST, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, which, by the way, is one of the most beautiful campuses in the world. I told people, I didn't know that when I came here. I discovered it only when I got here. And I said, what the, I told people if it weren't a university, it would be a world-class resort. It's on a promontory overlooking a beautiful bay. And my wife tells me, people here call it Rolls-Royce University because it was so well funded. There's a thing in Hong Kong called the Jockey Club, and it sponsors all of the horse racing and takes 17% of the take. And so it's a nonprofit, but it's extremely wealthy and gives away a lot of money. So it has gave away a lot of money to the university. There's also some extremely wealthy property magnates who gave a lot of money. So it's a very, very well funded university.
Can Americans be students there, or only?
Oh yeah. There are some American. They're mostly Hong Kong, some mainland a lot of mainland students. My last class that I taught was, I think, all mainland students, but that's because there were jobs. The class was called Carbon Emissions Trading, and China has been starting kind of tentatively, gradually, a national carbon emissions trading program. They had 7 pilot projects. They're trying to integrate them. I don't know how far they'll get with that, but that's that's jobs were opening up in that area. And actually next semester I'll teach an environmental economics course again.
And they speak English, right? I mean, you don't have to. I mean, they all speak English. Yeah.
Yeah. They speak. They all speak English. You know, a lot of Hong Kongers. Their English isn't great. My wife's English isn't great, but I don't speak. I have not learned to speak the local language.
Yeah.
So that's yeah. That's it. That's pretty much my background. Two things: the finance field and this. And so I find myself in a lot of meetings having to do with climate change, alternative energy, and it's something we can talk about. By the way, I tend to be a natural skeptic, so just about any movement that I'm involved in, I wind up being the skeptic.
The contrarian. It sucks. I just want to be part of the cool kids. Hold on just a second. I gotta close my. As you remember last time, my assistant right here wants to join us on occasion, but I'm like that too. And at one time in my life, I just like to go with the flow. I just can't do it. You know what I'm saying? It's I don't know if it's ingrained from birth or what. I just cannot do it. I always got to be skeptical. It's weird. Ugh,
yeah. So anyway, so I have to tell you, I mean, I almost don't know anybody. You know, we have this kind of grouping thing, and it's very hard to escape it. But I know almost nobody who supports Trump. So the result is that when you talk to anybody, there's just an assumption that of course, we think he's an idiot and a madman, So I do know two people one who voted for him. He's a Chinese guy. He doesn't say much about it, but he said he just thought, you need to change things. Obama didn't change anything. So, and then I know another guy who's Canadian, so he didn't vote for him, but unfortunately, the guy's a bit of a madman. I mean, he ran we have a thing here, a philosophy professor runs it, called Philosophy Cafe, and he has sessions where we discuss some topic that has a philosophical tinge to it. Well, that Canadian guy who supports Trump, agrees with Trump, ran a session on a couple of years ago on political correctness, and he did quite a good job of it, and I mostly agreed with him. But then he ran another session recently and just went off the rails, and it was like he just wanted to get people, mainly women, mad.
Yeah.
And it was like we could have had a good discussion, but he just decided he's going to see if he can get everybody mad.
Yeah.
So anyway, too bad. But he and I did have some good discussions about climate change, which was very, and we wound up on friendly terms. Anyway.
Kind of the Pauline Kael, right? Remember her, Pauline Kael from the New York Times? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Right. I think the New Yorker, wasn't she?
Was the New Yorker? Yes, maybe the New Yorker. Yeah.
Yeah, she wrote about movies, and I really like movies, and I sometimes I agreed with her. I agreed with her about what she called the sound of mucus. I remember seeing that with a date. I mean, this was a long time ago, and as we walked out, the date turned to me and said, "Wasn't that wonderful?" And I just kind of swallowed. I thought, what can I say?
Well, for those who aren't aware, Pauline Kael says she can't believe Nixon won because no one she knew voted for him. So she's kind of gone down in history as the bubble of the New York City types, which look, we all got our bubbles. I mean, that's all there is to it. But that's the issue that those of us on the right would say, hell yeah, you're just like Pauline Kael. I mean, this is old school politics, but you know, the Nixon one going away. Anyway, that's for the folks that are watching or wondering what we're talking about. Yeah, I wonder if the you know, at the end of the day, they say, you know, a lot of the education establishment is more you know, the business minded going to business. That might be more of the conservative types that go into business, and the educational establishment go into more creative. You know, the liberals go more creative and things like that. And I think there's probably something to be said about that for sure. That there's more probably entrepreneurships are probably more along the line of the Republicans, and more, you know, creative types, musician, artists, and educators are more along the lines of the left, I imagine. I bet if you did a survey, there's probably something to be true about that for sure.
I think that's true. I think there's, yeah, I mean, people who are business oriented, which I'm really not. I've always had to have a, you know, a partner who does the business aspects. I mean, there are characteristics that, for example, if somebody asked for something to be done that required, you know, the kind of, let's say, technical creativity, that technical abilities that I have, I would just do it as quickly as possible, because I wanted to show I could really, you know, boy, I'm really good at that. And my partner would never send it to them, and I'd say, well, yeah, how come you didn't? He'd say, well, you know, you got to introduce a bureaucratic lag. You know, make them think it was harder than it was. And I said, well, okay, that's almost like lying. I mean,
oh man, that's funny, Mike. One of my wife's, she has 8 brothers and sisters. One of her brothers was a mailman, and he's 6'4". He's a tall guy. Long story short, but he always, you know, ran through his unit, his route fast, and the union said, you got to slow down. He said, you're making us all look bad. Yeah. He goes, I'm just trying to get home and get done with this. He goes, no, you can't do this. We have to, you can only deliver so many letters per hour or something. That's just, I always kind of thought that was funny. Actually, it's funny because I don't think I told you this last time. My wife's parents are both spoke Chinese. I'm sure it's Mandarin. And it was interesting because he was a first generation from Ireland. Literally, his dad was a drunken Irishman, and he was put in an orphanage when his mom, you know, when they came over. And I'm butchering this whole thing, but his younger brother, in a Catholic orphanage in the Bronx, his younger brother kept wetting the bed, and the nuns in the orphanage literally broke his ribs because his younger brother would not stop wetting the bed. And anyway, the point about that is, so he went up, so his just poor as can be, and he actually went to the same school. In fact, I got the yearbook upstairs in my attic. He's since passed, but with Anthony Scalia. They went to the same high school, and I got Anthony Scalia in this as a freshman, and I can't remember the high school, some, you know, Jesuit high school, is in my wife's dad's yearbook from 1945 or something like that. Isn't that crazy? Anthony Scalia is nuts. And long story short, he learned Chinese, he learned Russian, and he was a teacher at Western Kentucky University of Chinese. And that's where he met my wife's mom. And they'd go to like Chinese restaurants. There's these big, the mom was 6 foot as well, big, tall, pale white Irish people would order and start having conversations in Chinese. And I said, man, that has got to be the funniest thing ever, man. It cracks me up.
Yeah, I have a real Irish son-in-law now. My daughter spent years in Ireland at the university, and met this guy, and he's I wish I could talk like him. He has this Irish brogue, you know, and he descended. He says, you know, one of his, you know, great grandfathers or something was one of those, you know, leading the Irish rebellion. Right. And if you talk about England, he will say 700 years of tyranny. You know. Oh
man, it's like, yeah. That's funny. Actually, it's man. Actually, it's interesting about my wife's dad, because we actually have the House Un-American HUAC committee, because he actually have the paper. It's just so much mementos that he had, because he worked at the Department of Defense for many years as a translator, because he spoke Russian, and we just got all these different things on, like the old commie stuff, and it's like literally historic. It's I sat there when her mom died, and we got to go through the attic. I'm just looking at this stuff like, holy crap, this is literally like the pamphlet for the HUAC committee, and you know, with all that stuff, Joe McCarthy and all. I'm just like, this is, oh my, and I got like So much stuff on that. It's just, it's exciting for sure.
That's it.
Jill just writes in, she has an undergrad math degree and spent 35 years in IT programming, then management. She says she has a very hard time listening to liberals as it seems logic doesn't exist in that world, Michael. And that's an interesting way to start. She goes, do liberals, and here's a lady who I'm very fond of, but she says, do you think that there's a disconnect between liberalism and logic? We'll just throw that out there and see what your thoughts are.
Oh boy. Well, first, I mean, the problem is what is liberalism? I have to ask, what do you mean liberalism? It depends on what you mean. I don't know. Okay. Do people who, all right, so there are some people that would, you might say, hold definably liberal views, and liberalism, I think these days is a little different. There's a wonderful essay by John McWhorter, a professor at Princeton, I believe, and it's really the essay. I mean, it's not a liberal essay. It's a counter liberal essay saying, that there's all this pressure to recognize I think I would call it the intersectionality principle, that all of these oppressed identity categories suffer from the same oppressiveness of the more empowered versus the less empowered, and everything you write has to acknowledge that, or if you go against that, then you're sort of, you might be subject to cancel culture. Well, okay, I mean, people like that, I don't people who don't think straight, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not a liberal, I guess, if that's what it is.
She's talking more of the AOC type, the new kind, not the old school liberal, but more of the this new breed that just seems to have come out of nowhere and seems to be. It's actually even saying 2 + 2 = 4 is now some kind of white supremacy thing. It's nuts.
Okay. No, that makes no sense to me, and I know about this. I read about it. I don't really experience it. However, I do experience it a little bit. I have experienced it because of the people that I find myself thrown in with, because I'm a professor of environment and sustainability. That's what it's called. And there are things that I think are supremely silly. So, for example, but it's like they have to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, we have a dinner in the department, or a lunch, okay, but it's casual. You get a kind of a box lunch, and you get I think it's a metal straw.
Yeah.
Because it is believed that what is it? Plastic straws, I guess, are evil, because they found one lodged in a turtle's nose.
Right.
Okay, this kind of stuff is crazy, and yes, not logical. The plastic bag thing is not logical.
No.
The best thing to do is use a lot of plastic bags, but then make sure you dispose of them in landfills properly, because you can put 1 billion of them in a small, very tiny volume of landfill. So a lot of this stuff is not logical. And at one time I was in a discussion group that is supposed to be a book review group, and but it was organized by somebody who was really into going to these so-called COP meetings. The COP means conference of parties, but it's the series of meetings after the 1992 Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit that launched the series of meetings that led first to the Kyoto Protocol, and all of this is to try to limit global warming, climate change. So I think he organized the group, and so they're all people who have some relation to the climate change area. So at one point, I think I said something about how we really don't know what's going to happen. And one woman kind of started screaming, like, how can you be against, and I said, did I say that? Okay, so look, there are irrational people, but there are irrational people everywhere.
I completely agree.
I mean, every area that I've seen, I thought it was confined to finance, but I see it in other areas too, and it's not everybody, of course, and there is some groupthink, of course. So you may have to you may deal with a situation where people feel they have to mouth a certain doctrine, and they do. And I feel that this is what happens in finance, because I wrote this thing once about how DFA, dimensional fund advisors, had really gone downhill because it had become, scientistic, as Hayek calls it. That I wrote this after the publisher, Bob Hoopsher, sent me something that had been written internally at DFA, but it was available, not something you couldn't distribute.
Right.
And it was just nonsense. I mean, it started with something that Fama and French had written, which was nonsense. But then it got worse and worse. And I thought, how can they write this nonsense? So then in my article, I always ask, how can this happen? So I thought, okay, what happens is they hire these people who got a PhD in financial mathematics or mathematical finance. There are two meanings. There's financial mathematics, and then there's mathematical finance. I think it's mathematical finance that is the bad one. Financial mathematics is a field of mathematics that takes off from finance problems, but then just becomes pure mathematics with absolutely no application whatsoever, no intended application. But mathematical finance pretends to have applications. So my theory was that DFA, being now a rich company, and I knew David Booth when he was starting it, and I think he's a good guy. I mean, I haven't seen him in a while, but and not somebody with very good sense and good ideas that were not particularly technical, just good ideas. But they get rich, they get aboard with Nobel Prize winners in finance, and they hire some finance PhDs, and they get there and they hear these people on the board who are to them gurus talking the way Fama and French must have talked, because they're not really knowing what they're talking about when it comes to math. And they try to imitate it. They figure, well, I'm here, I got to talk like them.
Right.
And so they start speaking in tongues, in effect. Which I, and people do this. They try to talk like the people around them, because that's, either to keep their job or to rise in their job, or because they feel like they're going to be ostracized if they don't. And I can't do that. A lot of people can't do it. It's probably better for you career-wise if you do it.
And a lot of people are afraid they're afraid to step in because they're like, I don't want to look like a fool. You know what I'm saying, Michael? We got tons of evidence on that, like where people are just talking just nonsense, and people are like, he's talking so well that and eloquently and so with so much power for you must be making sense, and yet they're not making any sense. It's crazy to me. That's
yeah, yeah.
uh,
So I think,
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, well, I mean, I think without, I'm not close to it because I'm not at an American university. It's not like that. We don't get this political correctness kind of thing here. At least I don't.
Well, see,
And
that's a scary thing, though, Michael. See, this is what concerns me deeply in America.
yeah,
I was talking to two ladies yesterday, and I won't say more, but let's just put it this way: they're very big in software development, very big, and they have to go to Pakistan or maybe India, freaking Brazil, all these places because they're just Americans are not. There's not that many people, men or women, who are coming up the ranks to learn this. And the thing that scares me to death of this whole situation of political correctness is just the malice, that we have on campus now. I mean, if you look at a guy like Brett Weinstein, he's a liberal. He's a liberal, classic liberal. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know if you heard.
I don't know who that is. Yeah.
He's not a physicist, evolutionary scientist of a school called Evergreen, and basically
Evergreen State College in Washington. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he stood against the Mao because the Maoists were saying you have to. The whole thing was nuts. Anyway, he's not a right winger by any stretch. Does not like Trump. But the point was, they actually were trying to physically assault him because of the way he viewed things. And he's liberal. And so here's my concern is you have all these people in your neck of the woods who are learning. And we're sitting there thinking, oh, we can't have any discussion. We got to say there's 57 genders. We got to say 2 + 2 is 5. We can't. And I just, at some point, we're going down and they're going up and up and up. And I just wonder, in 2 generations, are we just going to, slice our own throats because we can't compete? It's scary.
I can't. I won't get into this too much, but actually we do have something like that in Hong Kong, but it's very different from what you understand about Hong Kong in the U.S. And it's so different that I may have trouble convincing you of it. But the anti-mainland sentiment is actually sort of racist, because it's they'll beat up people that speak they hear speaking Mandarin, and it's forced groupthink. You have to say the police are brutal, but they are not here. They are not. I mean, they have the same problems police have anywhere, less than in the U.S. because there's no guns here. So they in the U.S. I don't know how somebody could be a policeman. Oh, it would be so scary. I just can't.
You can't win. You can't
win. Anybody can have a gun. Anybody could pull it on you at any time. They make a motion and they might be ready to pull a gun. It's a terrible situation. But in Hong Kong, these people are pushed into groupthink, and I know they are. It's because otherwise you're subject to canceling on bullying, brutal bullying on Facebook and so on. Although in Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I don't.
The American Revolution. If you were, stand against Sam Adams, you know what I'm saying? Back in the old days, I mean, it's the same kind of browbeating and stuff. And I mean, I don't think that's unique to our current time, but it's sad that, that's where being a contrarian and a skeptic, always you're like, man, because you're always on the outside looking in. You're like, oh, just for once, I'd want to be on the inside, like I said, and you just inherently, it's not ingrained in you to just go along with the crowd. You can't do it by your own nature. You cannot just go along with the crowd. You always got to take a skeptic eye, which is wonderful. But at the same time, it can be kind of lonely too. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And if everybody did it, you probably wouldn't have a revolution. So sometimes you have to think, okay, I'm thankful for those crazy people. Okay. And maybe this is the reason for the Trump support. I don't know, but
let's talk about that, because I know it's on your end. So I'm coming from the libertarian right, Michael. So I've espoused 100% drug legalization since 1992,
mhm,
93. Not just marijuana, everything. I think there's a guy named psychiatrist, something like that, named Thomas Szazaz, SC or S.
SZASZ, yeah,
Right. I've been a
yeah.
big fan of his for many, many moons. And
Uh-huh.
long story short, so when people say, "Oh, you're from the right," no, I may be, if that's the right wing position, I agree to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think a lot of us on the right, the reason we threw in with Trump is we saw I'm just speaking for me, but I was a
Mm,
big George W. supporter, and I remember in 2004 thought that was the biggest election ever. And
mm,
then I recognized that he was just as competent as everybody else. You know what I'm saying? I said, he's just like, he's a nice man. I'm sure he is. But as a
mm,
president, he could just, their whole focus, the traditional Republican Party is on the country club Republicans, where tax cuts at all costs. And
mhm,
I've never liked John McCain, but I'll never forget, he said, at some point, you've got to recognize that has no appeal. There's only so many people that pay income taxes anymore. At some point, you got to realize that your tax cuts are just going over the head of the vast majority of Americans. And it took a while for that to sink in, but then it did. And I said,
mm,
after Obama won, I said, something, at the end of the day, the Republicans are arguing for policies that really don't have a huge impact on me in terms of like enterprise zones, tax cuts on capital gains and stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, this has no appeal to me at all. I mean, I don't want to raise taxes, but enough of this, we got to lower taxes, because at some point you do got to pay for some of these stuff. And anyway, so then I'm sitting there thinking, and then I started doubting the whole Bush Obama seemed to be just a conjoining at the hip. They didn't end the wars and stuff. And I was big, long story short, I think we recognized, the Republicans, too late, that once the government gets bigger, regardless of it's Republican or Democrat, it never goes away. So we still have the TSA, we still have all this stuff, all these big government programs that were put in by compassionate conservative on George Bush.
mm,
It's just a joke, man. And we all know this. And we're sitting there thinking, okay, so what exactly did we get for this? Well, we got bigger and bigger, more intrusive government, and the Republicans are supposed to be the people for small government. But
mm,
then you look over here to the left, and you're like, well, I can't. Those guys have gone crazy. There's no other way around that. And then I look over here, and all I got is Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush. I'm like, there's no one here that's arguing for more of a middle class renaissance, so to speak. No one is, and it certainly wasn't Hillary. And I'm sitting there thinking, and then Trump comes along and he says, basically, look, illegal immigration is hurting poor communities, Black, Spanish, and whites, poor whites. That's a fact. The opioid epidemic is hurting poor communities, Black, Spanish, and whites. That's a fact. And these are arguments that no one else is talking about, and no one else refuses to. They refuse to talk about illegal immigration. They refuse to talk about the issues that come into being with just this insane reliance on like NAFTA. You know what I'm saying? Where that was just bad. And finally, someone comes in and says, look, everyone's arguing the same thing. We are arguing differently, which is more of what I would call Main Street versus Wall Street. And that's so cliched anymore, but I think there's something to be said about that. And it's very appealing, because finally they're saying, you Wall Street guys, man, you made out like bandits on Obama and Bush, with freaking Hank Paulson, all these guys. And we're sitting there thinking, and we're left with the crumbs. And at some point, it's kind of like, it's a frustration that many conservative Republicans who are more small government say, all right, well, we lost. We've been advocating small government for years, and the government keeps growing. So we might as well throw in with it and see if we can't make it at least more beneficial to us, if that makes sense. And remains to be seen if it will. It won't, but at least we feel like it's having some kind of say, but we don't. We all get that. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. So I mean, actually, when Trump first was kind of rising in the polls, I thought, maybe he won't be so bad. He might kind of turn over some apple carts. The problem is I've always had this thing about lying. If somebody is a liar, I'll just get turned off on them right away. So that was, I could never consider voting for the guy. But other than that, I thought, maybe he won't be so bad. In fact, I remember having a lunch with a guy that I know who I guess must have been of the, let's say, liberal category. Wouldn't have known that he was, because he's very, very much a businessman. Very, you know, he's a he he made a lot of money. I hope he's not listening to this, but I'm sure he's not. But he made a lot of money, and I wasn't sure what, because he had worked for Mattel, the toy company, and for Lucas, the Star Wars.
Okay, right.
And I thought, so maybe he got paid a lot. He's an angel capitalist, so he just funds things. He starts things, funds them. And one time he just kind of mentioned in passing something like he made what he really made his money on. It was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because of all of the spin-offs, the toys, he must have had something to do with that. But at any rate, so we're having lunch, and it was when Ted Cruz and Trump were kind of like neck and neck in the polls for the Republican nomination. He said, "Which do you think would be worse, Ted Cruz or Trump?" And I said, "Oh, Ted Cruz," because I thought Trump wouldn't be so bad. I thought he'd not, but he wouldn't be so bad. But I have to tell you, I think it's just gotten worse and worse. And I did watch the debate last night, and it's the best commentary was, I've really become a devotee of something called the Dispatch, which is you know about this?
The Bill Kristol's new thing, or is that the Bulwark? Well, the Dispatch is something like that, right?
Maybe so. Yeah, the Kristol. I think Kristol's is the Bulwark.
Yeah.
But Kristol did try to recruit, apparently, to run for president, David French, which seemed kind of wild. It seemed wild to David French too. David French is one of the commentators. I think the best. Everything he writes, I think, is just wonderful.
He did recruit in 2016, but French said he said niet. So I'm sure Kristol was trying to get him again in 2020. But David French, I'm familiar with National Review. National Review has lost their. It was funny because Bill Buckley said, or John O'Sullivan, the Sullivan Rule said, any organization that isn't explicitly right wing will become left over time. And he was the publisher of the National Review many years ago. And that's the Sullivan Rule. And I look at the National Review today as a long time, and I'm not anymore, a subscriber to the National Review. And I say the Sullivan's Rule is right there with the National Review, because they've gone, I don't know what happened to them. I don't know what happened to the National Review. It's
really.
They were,
I don't know.
They had, the funny thing, Michael, National Review back in 1995, they had a thing that talked about end the drug war. It said the drug war is lost. And they were also anti illegal immigration. And I said, this is me. I literally don't like illegal immigration. I love immigration. I don't like illegal immigration. And I don't like the war on drugs. And I said, I fit right in with here. This is like a new conservatism, which I enjoy very much, not so much the country club. And it was more of almost like somewhat taking some of the best of Pat Buchanan with leaving some of the stupid stuff out there, which on top of some of the best of like the Harry Brown was running for the Libertarian Party and whatnot, and who I voted for in 1996. It was taking some of the Main Street populism of Pat Buchanan, combining the Harry Brown Libertarian stuff. And I said, that's, for me, it was awesome. I said, that's perfect. School choice, we've health savings accounts before, back then they're called medical savings accounts, vouchers and stuff. And I was all for it. And then something happened in National Review. It was weird. And I think what happened was ultimately they got a bunch of atheists. French is an atheist, Kevin Williamson. There's another guy up there too. And I think they lost some of that connection to maybe their old school Christianity. But either way, sad to see him. I literally could care less what National Review says anymore. Even though I do read Williamson is Williamson on Andy McCarthy. I'll do read him on occasion for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Just a bunch of thoughts passed through my head, which I'm not sure which one to grab onto.
Take your pick, man.
I am not the least bit religious. It just doesn't take with me. My former wife got more and more religious in the Jewish faith, and she would sign us up because she knew I wasn't.
Right.
She sort of got us into religion light, which was worse. I mean,
right? No, exactly. That's Catholicism today, Michael. Oh no, keep that away. That's religion comes from in here. You know what I'm saying? Someone says they want me to ask you what specifically, other than Trump lies, what do you not like about Trumpster?
I'll mention what the most recent thing that I read, which happens to be David French came out with a column, and he said the debate revealed the truth. Trumpism is bullyism. Yeah. It's this idea that you can pretend to be a man by being a bully, and you can pretend that your country is great because it's a bully. This is just absolutely dead wrong. I think it's just dead wrong. And it's this thing about bullying China is I mean, to the extent of total misstatements. It's not true that China caused the virus. It did arise in China. Some local people did suppress it for a while for fear that if they didn't suppress the rumors going around, that they would not be looked upon kindly by their political superiors. But I mean, the same thing happens in the U.S.
Where are they saying the virus came from out there? Are they saying still from a wet market? Is that the still word on the street?
That's the best theory, but it's very, nobody really knows. They seem to have found evidence of the same genetics in viruses many months earlier in other places around the world. So it's it's not a solved problem.
Right.
We don't know, but the initial outbreak was in that Wuhan area, right. Seemed to be around. So, it doesn't matter if the same virus was also somewhere else in the world. That's where that initial outbreak occurred, and China did an excellent job of suppressing it, and they did cooperate with as much as they could. They put out they sequenced it. They put out the sequence for anybody to see who could understand it, of course, around the world. I think China deserves no blame for this whatsoever. And
now there is some folks going back to Brett Weinstein who says there's more and more evidence that it wasn't a laboratory in Wuhan. You know what I'm saying? And we just don't know. But you're not buying that?
I don't buy that because there's they say, listen, perhaps you have to be an expert in epidemiology, or not even epidemiology, in whatever the subject is that understands how you compare one virus DNA with another one to have your own super informed opinion. But the things I've seen that cite academic literature, and even here, I have to say, in the finance field, I care nothing for the academic literature.
Right.
But in science,
right.
In science, I believe it. Scientists, I believe scientists are serious people by and large, and care about getting at the truth. And it seems to me they're saying the evidence is that it couldn't have been.
Some guy made a point real quick about Trump's bullying, and actually this sparked some of I remember when George W. Bush was in office, and why we don't care about the bullying, because I frankly I don't. And here's why. Bush was it still to this day ticks me off. Bush was a punching bag for everybody. He never fought back. Karl Rove said, "Don't fight back. When you wrestle with pigs, you both get muddy." And the thing that Bush did not do, and I will forgive him, but I'm still angry by it. He wasn't the guy being bullied. It was his supporters. And I'll never forget. I'm sitting there thinking, man, Bush, you're allowing Kanye West, who's since come around, but still, you're allowing all these people to label you and your supporters as racist, as Klansmen, as this, that, and the other, and you're not fighting back. And this is the issue that comes with Trump's bullying, is that those of us on the right said, we've been on the back end of this for as long as I can see. The only person I remember fighting back was Buchanan in the 1992 primary against George H.W. Bush. That was it. Everyone else has been, let's just good time rock and roll, while we feel like we're sitting there thinking, and I'll never forget with George Bush, he just would not fight back. And then I remember Newt Gingrich. This was what ticked me off probably more than anything. Newt Gingrich getting on that bench with Nancy Pelosi in 2000, right when Obama won, talked about we got to climate change the number one battle and all that. I'd say our side always capitulates to their side. We never fight back. We always are on the receiving end. And when I saw Newt Gingrich did that, who, by the way, I live in his former district, which is now run by a Democrat, it's sickened me to death. And then finally, someone out of Trump comes along and says, we're going to punch back. And I say, hallelujah. And I think not just me, many of us on the right said, thank God, because these guys have been at us for a year. I remember, just real quick, in 1992, I just got out of the Army and I just started George Mason. And it was during the Clinton Bush years. I remember I went to Richmond, Virginia for the debate, the first debate. We're just watching in some hotel for the Republican Party. And I remember walking down there, Michael, and people were throwing stuff at us, calling us Nazis and Klansmen. I was like, well, what? The Klan was on the Democrat. I was the weirdest thing. And I said, what is going on? I was only 22 years old. And trust me, I was grown on the far left. My parents had Angela Davis, Gus Hall buttons on their... Anyway, so I wasn't ignorant of politics or rabbles, but I was like, I'll never forget that. And I said, this is the weirdest thing, how angry the left was. And it's got progressively worse. And finally, Trump says, we're going to take it. We're going to fight back. As much as it might be uncouth, it's like, someone's finally freaking engaging. That's where where my side, it just is like, and again, I'm just speaking for me, but I have a sneaky suspicion I'm speaking for many.
So it may be what you experienced in particular, that the closer you are to something that's really repugnant, maybe the more reaction you'll have to it. I had that. I was a protester. I always want to be careful about how I say this, but during the Vietnam War, I spent 2 years, starting 1966. I was in principal in graduate school in mathematics. And I got a stipend, which I thought was quite good, but it was $250 a month. I paid for my, but I spent 2 years really devoted to this fighting, let's say arguing against the Vietnam War, because well, you'll see what I liked and what I didn't like when I tell you the first story. So what happened was my antipathy toward lying just kind of flared up. There was this paper that had been released by the Johnson administration titled Vietnam Aggression from the North. Mm-hmm. And then it was critiqued by, and it had an appendix with some statistics that you couldn't read. I mean, it's just really a mess. You didn't read the appendix. But this journalist, I.F. Stone, read the appendix, and he very carefully documented how the data in the appendix completely contradicted the thesis in the, so I thought, okay, I'm gonna go and fight this. So at that time, 4% of the country was against the Vietnam War. Yeah. 4%.
It's about 67, you said, 67, so?
66.
Okay, so, okay, gotcha.
So I thought, well, what station? So I go, the most prominent one was SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. Okay. So I go to that, and the president is this guy named Steve Lubin, who is now I'd say predictably an emeritus professor of law at Northwestern University. This was at Northwestern. I went to graduate school at Northwestern University. So I go to this meeting of the SDS, and he starts out saying, okay, here's where the demonstrations are going to be. We're going to have a demonstration on this date here and demonstration on this date here.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, I mean, shouldn't we try to explain to people why we're demonstrating? And he said, if they don't already agree with us, fuck them.
Right.
That's what he said. That's what he said. And I said, so I thought, okay, wrong organization for me. I wound up starting my own, although it was a branch of a larger one. And it was a lot of the people in that organization were Quakers, and they are I have a lot of experience, not more with Mennonites.
Yeah, Mennonites. No, right on.
And they're they seem very sensible people, generally very sensible. Anyway,
Anabaptist folks are a wonderful crew. The Anabaptist sect. You know what I'm saying? So I'm very familiar with Mennonites. Absolutely. Yeah, right on.
Yeah. So a little later, so I become the president of this branch of another organization, and on campus, president of the campus organization, and a branch of Young Americans for Freedom starts up, and its president is in favor of the war, of course. So I proposed to debate him.
Yeah.
We have a good debate, but Steve Lubin calls me a fascist because I agreed to debate this guy. Okay, so I have experience with this kind of nonsense. Here's another experience. I was living in Portugal for 5 months in 2005, spring of 2005. And I had a kind of a lady friend, and we went to visit a friend of hers who was worked with a rather famous filmmaker. So she was an artistic kind of, you know, very volatile, emotional personality.
Right.
And we start talking about, or she starts talking about George Bush. And she says, Bush lied. And I said, you know, I don't think it was really a lie. A lot of people thought that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. Right. She threw me out. She just actually literally threw me out. So she said, how can you defend him? I said, I'm not defending what he did. I'm just saying I don't think he was really lying. I think he believed it. Hans Blix believed that Hussein had nuclear
and
weapons.
She just did not want to hear anything that violated her fragile viewpoint, unfortunately. You know,
well, she said, you know, the problem is people who see things in black and white. You can't, you know, they just, if you're either on their side, you're either with them or you're against them. And that's
one of the things, you know, it's funny about the Vietnam War, because the reason my dad didn't go is because my mom was pregnant with me. He got drafted, and apparently you could, if you were pregnant, your wife was pregnant, you didn't have to go. So I literally saved my dad from going. And for the record, I'm 100% against the draft as well. That ticks off a lot of my right-wing people, because I think the draft is evil, because I don't think you should be sent to go to fight some politician's war, regardless of the only 4% of people are against it. That's just not, I can't think of anything worse to violate one's personal liberty than said.
Well, that would certainly be a libertarian thing to be. By the way, I used to, I had a good friend who was a libertarian when I was in Colorado. In fact, he was the president for a very brief time of a libertarian think tank, which you may know of. They're called the Independence Institute.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Based in Colorado.
Yes, sir.
So he and I would go cross country skiing for a day. We'd go, you know, out in the wilderness and go cross, and we would start out a discussion. We'd say, well, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
And every time I said that, his first response would be, well, I'm a libertarian, and libertarians think that. And then he would state the libertarian position. And then I'd say, well, okay, but what about this? And what about that? And we'd debate it, and basically we'd always wind up just agreeing completely on everything. But it was interesting. So I agree with you about the drug thing. I think this is a lot of the problems in the US, especially with the Black community, stem from this war on drugs. It's an outrage. I mean, you can, you know, they justify no knock and knock and enter and then storm in, based not on danger to human life, but on the danger that somebody will throw the pot down the toilet.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Yeah.
especially with, all right, so let's think about what do I disagree with you on, Mike? So let's see. I like Trumpster because I think he's taken it to the corporate tight. And I have a sneaky thinking we're going to agree on this a lot. I think a lot of these guys in the corporate area are how can I say this? I don't think the policies that we've enacted over, Clinton, the new wave of Clinton, George W. Bush and whatnot, even Obama to some degree, have favored the middle class in America. And I think that, I don't know if you would agree with this or disagree. I like the idea of somehow trying to rein these guys in, if that makes sense. And
corporations,
the big banks and stuff. I do think they've gotten, like, J.P. Morgan just $1 billion was a $1 billion fine. I'm like, what? How come these guys? How come what's his name? Jamie Dimon. How come his company can pay $1 billion fine and I'm thinking he's still the CEO. I don't know. I don't pay that much mind to it, but how come he just walks away? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, wait a second, but this isn't what? I mean,
I agree with you on that. Okay, the reason, I mean, look, what can I say? Of course, I agree with you. I don't like that. I think they're a bunch of, they sell. I mean, I think this about politicians too, but it seems hopeless that they ought to try to inform people about the truth instead of trying to make them believe something that's just good for their pocketbook. And the banks, this is especially in the investment management field, the idea is to make you believe a snow job,
right?
And that, I just think this is terrible. And I mean, the financial crisis, God, it's as bad as anybody could think. I wrote a very, very long piece about that for a think tank here, now called the Asia Global Institute, that dissected all the things wrong with the models, and the way and it's just ridiculous. I won't go into it, but these banks, I think, it needs some conviction and prison for some of these people, but you understand why it doesn't happen, and it's too bad, and I don't know what to do about it. First of all, people at the top have deniability.
Yeah.
Second, they have extremely expensive lawyers, and the government doesn't.
Yep.
What are you going to do?
That's the thing, is at the end of the day, they can feign ignorance, and but you can't prove that they knew. I mean, how do you prove that? I don't know. And that's the issue. The Graham, Phil Graham got rid of the Glass-Steagall bill. And I remember thinking, they got to get rid of that. Now I look back and say, oh man, I wish they would have probably kept that. Remember the Glass-Steagall, and I'm like, they should bring that back. I mean, and we've seen, and this is not laissez-faire capitalism by any stretch of the imagination. This is just. Were you paying attention during the LT, long-term capital management fiasco? Does that ring a bell?
Oh, of course.
What was, I mean, the same kind of thing then, right? I mean, it's exact. We got the smartest guys in the house, all these PhDs, and kaboom, they almost take the whole thing down.
I don't think you can call it stupidity on their part. But you can call it this problem that they all have safety nets in a sense. So, although I think it was very distressing to some of them. To some of them, they had all their money in that, but they still come out okay, because they have experience in a field where you get paid very well, just for experience, even if the experience was you screwed up royally. So it's like they don't. The floor under them is a lot higher than it is for most people. And they took a huge risk. They said, okay, the spread between developing country debt and U.S. Treasury debt is wider than it's ever been. It's bound to close.
Yeah.
It didn't. It went the opposite direction, and they were highly leveraged, and it killed them completely. But one interesting thing about that is they had very good returns for a while it did close for a little while, for 4 years or so. Those are all in the hedge fund database. The next year, and a lot of hedge fund strategies are like this. They're strategies that are going to do very well for a while, and then they're going to crash worse than they ever did well. And that's what happened to long-term capital management. And their data for the year they crashed, that's not in the databases. So if you see any information about hedge fund returns, which are abysmal even in the databases,
right.
It's worse than that.
What do you think? Paul, what do you think about Monte Carlo analysis, if you don't mind? I mean, is that something? I do financial planning, not really investment management, but Monte Carlo, give me your thoughts on that as a math.
I think it's well, first of all, that's the area of mathematics that I know the most about. Stochastic processes, Brownian motion, random walk, and Monte Carlo analysis is a computer implementation of a random walk. And I think it's quite useful for several reasons. One, doesn't give you a single answer, so it doesn't make you believe that there's a single answer.
Right.
Gives you a general idea what could happen and what's more likely than something else. And for certain, I'm about to use one. I'm going to write another article on rebalancing. And
for advisor perspectives.
Yeah, because it's been a while since I wrote, and Bob Hoopsher said, okay, there's been a few articles about it again, saying you should rebalance. I read them; they all said the same thing. So I'm gonna say, okay, here's what's wrong with that. And I'll say, here's what you should do, and I'll use some Monte Carlo simulation to do that. I think it's the most useful tool in the financial field, and the only real helpful use of mathematics, other than certain kinds of things that Taleb does. Taleb is the only person in the field who he doesn't talk nonsense, and he's a mathematician.
So you like Taleb? All right, cool.
Yeah. And if I wish my first book, the publisher asked me when my book was published the same damn year he publishes his, and his gets famous.
So you published a book the same year as Fooled by Randomness, but
Fooled by Randomness was earlier, but The Black Swan was 2007, and my book was 2007.
Oh, what's your book called, Michael?
The Big Investment Lie.
Oh, I didn't know you had a book, man. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to reading that for sure. Sweet. The Big Investment Lie in 2007. All right.
And then there's another one that I was the main on, but it's co-authored in 2014, and that was less fun to write. But I had an enjoyable time. That's what I was doing during that time in Portugal, was writing the Big Investment Lie.
Let me ask you a question about Monte Carlo, and I know this has nothing to do with politics. That's fine. I'm curious because I actually enjoy hearing your take on this. But the inputs are based on, we only have 100 years. You know what I'm saying? So we got 100 years of.
Yeah.
So
you have to. Yeah, I mean, there aren't very many inputs to a simple Monte Carlo. So the one I'm going to do, I'll make an assumption about the expected return on stocks. I'll say 7%. I don't know.
Okay.
Bonds 2%.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's
correlation.
I use 6.5% for stocks and 2% for bonds. Yeah, and what you were getting ready to say? What you say?
And then you need the standard deviation of each. Okay, I'll use 18 and 7. Okay, it makes a correlation between them. Say 0. It makes a difference to the results. What assumptions you make, and you pull these assumptions somewhat out of the air. But you also don't get, like a one answer result. You get something that says, okay, let's compare this to this using the same method of analysis. So I'll compare rebalancing versus buy and hold. And the result of the comparison will be the same no matter what assumptions I put in, because you have same assumptions for both. So if you use these techniques with some care and with some, just lack of certainty, I think they can be useful.
But just recognize, I mean, that's useful, but not definitive. And that's the one thing with some of the software. We used to run was a Nava plan, and it said you have 100% certainty that you're not going to run out of money based on this, that, the other. I use a Brinson study just the whole thing was. I said, I cannot believe we're putting this out there based on Monte Carlo. And I said, we're using 4.5%. The whole thing was nuts. And I'm sitting there thinking, we are hurting people by saying that they have 100. Like, literally, it's not saying there is, based on this is going to happen. And they're using the Brinson. Remember that Brinson study said 92% of the variability of your returns come from your asset allocation. But a lot of people said that's 92% of your returns come from your asset allocation. I said, that's not what this freaking.
It's not even that. I wrote an article about this too. And one of those authors I knew very well, Gil Biebauer, he died unfortunately, and he had a PhD in physics. And I kept wondering, what the hell happens to these people who know science, who know logic, and then they get into the finance field, and they get into it because there weren't any jobs, because after the moonshot, they cut back on the physicists they were hiring, and they should have kept hiring the physicists. So they're forced to go into finance, and somehow they lose their ability to reason. I can't understand it. So that study, it didn't do either of those things. It didn't say 90% of variability is due to return. It didn't say 90% of return is due to asset allocation. It didn't say 90% of variability is due to asset allocation either. What it did say is 90% of return is due to fluctuations in the market. 90% of volatility is due to fluctuations in the market. That's it. Whatever your asset allocation, you're going to get fluctuations. That's
what everybody's that's crazy.
That study it's just completely nuts. I wish I had had a chance to talk to Gil about this, because he would have just kind of, he was a very, very nice guy, just a really nice guy. And he would have kind of shrugged, I think. I don't know what he would.
That study right there has led, that's that.
Yeah.
I just wonder how much other crap is. Well, I don't even want to wonder, because it'll make my head just pound in frustration.
Almost all of it. Yeah.
So I wonder if that. So we go to the moon, then we cut back, and all these guys who are well educated, they don't go into physics anymore. They actually go into finance, and then we come fast forward 40 years later. Wall Street is dominating with just pushing paper at hedge funds and stuff, and we're lacking in science. And I wonder if there's something we can pin that back to saying all these physicists who trained went into finance as opposed to doing what they should have done, which is to change the world. You see what I'm saying? It's just when he said that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, we cut back there, and then we opened up where everyone can make a huge amounts of money peddling crazy stuff in financial industry. Then we got rid of various. It just seems to me that opened the floodgates for just all kinds of craziness on Wall Street. And then the vast amounts of wealth created by not actually doing anything productive, but just saying, I have a better hedge. I'm the new Yale David Swenson guy or whatever. And then it will never years of that back.
Have you seen these studies by my old friend and colleague and actually client for a while, Richard Ennis, who wrote recently about the record of endowment funds of the biggest endowment funds. And these are, so actually I just wrote an article that I think is going to be in Market Watch about this, but it's basically, it says that my title, but I don't get the choice of title. My title is the best in investing, the best and the brightest do worse than the mediocre and the dumb.
I saw that. I did see that article, and I think that was an advisor perspectives too.
No. This is I sent one off to Market Watch just a few days ago that I gave it that title. They'll give it whatever title.
No, but there's one where it said basically the ones that just followed the index were the low fees. You know what I'm saying? That actually beat the big. It was
in Journal of Portfolio Management. Richard Edesess' article was in there, and all the big endowments, the ones. What could be smarter than the managers of the endowments of Harvard, MIT, Princeton, actually MIT, my alma mater, did the best. So, but I think it's just completely random.
Right.
But the managers, and even Yale did poorly. So the managers of these, they have access to the Nobel Prize winners in their own universities, finance departments, and yes, they do worse than somebody who invests in an index fund in their 401k. Yeah.
If that doesn't prove the validity of just buying the index and being done with it, nothing will. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like nothing will. Yeah. Let me ask just on that. I was going to ask you. All right. So here's maybe a disagreement. I would love to take a small tax off these endowments. I think that'd be freaking awesome to say, okay, all these endowments, because first of all, I'd love to get rid of all charitable deductions. First of all, I'd love to have a flat tax, Michael, get rid of all charitable deductions and just let's go. I think these endowments, though, they're keeping all this money, and yet all these kids are coming out of college with huge amounts of debts, while these more and more administrators are getting hired, and they're not actually doing anything for the schools and universities. You know what I'm saying? I wonder if we were to somehow say, no, you can't do that anymore. We're going to take 5% of your. I don't know what it is, but it would be a penalty. For literally, it's almost like if you don't take your IRA out by the time you're 72, you have a penalty of 50%. It'd be almost like the same thing with the endowment. Say, look, if you don't help students, we're going to penalize you to some degree. And frankly, I would just do a tax. But I mean, they can do it. I don't care what they do. No one's going to listen to me. But I don't like these endowments having all this money and all these kids graduating with huge amounts of debt. It actually ticks me off. Any thoughts on that by chance?
I don't really, but I mean, I was thinking, okay, so something where we might disagree on, but we might not, is the area of climate change and alternative energy. But on your idea on endowments, it sounds like a good idea to me, but not something I've thought about at all.
Okay.
So,
all right,
so I don't have an immediate reaction.
Well, let's move to climate. I mean, are you worried that CO2 is leading to massive ice cap melts and all this stuff with the ocean rises? Is that something that's top of the mind of a concern for you? Like literally, not just it's a concern, but but a big concern where society's going to collapse shortly.
Okay, how big a concern? It's a concern. Okay, so how big a concern?
Keep talking. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, the question is, how big a concern is it? Let me put it this way. I think we need, over time, to move away from fossil fuels and probably not use them after some period of time. How soon that is I can't say.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably as soon as possible. But it's not possible to do it immediately.
Yeah.
So China has said they're going to do it by 2060. I think they will. However, and now here we could come to the Green New Deal, because in the debate yesterday, I was very glad to see that Joe Biden said, I think he said, I don't agree with the Green New Deal. I agree with the Biden, the Green, yeah, Green New Deal. I agree with the Biden plan. Now, I don't know what his plan is,
Right.
but I'm glad to see he doesn't just say, okay, I sign on.
Right.
I'm one of the group. I'm one of the, you know, I'm one of the choir. You know, I'm going to sing the Green New Deal, because there's one thing seriously wrong with the Green New Deal and a lot of these things, and that is that they seem to think nuclear is as bad as fossil fuels. And that's crazy. It's just crazy. I mean, if they believe that what's important is to reduce greenhouse gases,
right.
How can they be? Okay, they're against it because they think it's scary, but they haven't done their research. It's, you know, it's not scary for a large number of reasons. When Fukushima happened, but we should find something we disagree on here. But okay, so
if you don't like CO2 and you don't like nuclear, you're living in I don't know what fairy tale
yeah, I mean, I think this is crazy, but it's just. So I was at yet another meeting, and there were meetings. I wind up in a lot of meetings with presentations about renewable energy, about climate change here in Hong Kong, because the friend who actually brought me here or recommended me to the University of Science and Technology was the Minister for Undersecretary for the Environment in Hong Kong, and is very prominent politically in Hong Kong. And so, you know, she got me plugged right into all these groups. So I go to meetings, and there's lots of talk about renewable energy, wind and solar. Not a peep about nuclear energy. You hear it not once. So at one meeting, and I seem to be the person who does this all the time. I think I might have told you I did it on smart beta. This meeting on a panel on smart beta, and I'm the only one who says I think it's hogwash. The others think it's very valuable. And only during the intermission, the coffee break, do people come up to me and say, you know, you're right. Well, the same damn thing happened. There was a meeting, and I stood up during the question period, and I said, how can we have 2.5-hour meeting on climate change and solutions, and there's not a single mention of nuclear energy? And during the coffee break, somebody said, you're absolutely right, but not during the meeting, because nobody can. It's the third rail in these groups, and it's the third rail in Europe. Nobody in Europe can mention it. It's
except France, right? The France got significant.
France has lots of it, and Germany. You know, I've met people who should be expert about this from Germany, and I think, you know, in many respects, Germany has been extremely sensible. But if you talk about nuclear energy and you say, but you import some from France,
right?
They say, oh no, we don't. No, we don't. I said, no, come on, you do. From Czechoslovakia too, Czech Republic too, but they'll deny it. They'll say they don't.
So the Democratic Party just added that to their platform this year. I don't know if you know that. So the Democrats finally said they said they didn't have. I mean, they're pretty negative on nuclear, but at least in this regard, they said, including nuclear in terms of carbon free. And so that seemed to be a big first step. So maybe that will break this third rail that the Democrats are finally saying nuclear is a solution. I don't know.
I think, I mean, if they win, which I have to tell you, I hope they do, because I think we need to while I you know, I understand your point about the reasons for Trump. I think he's proven much worse than I thought he would be at the beginning, and the debate was just appalling. And Republicans, I'm glad to see, are stepping up and saying, okay, don't do that again. So I don't know what's gonna, so if the Democrats win, I hope they embrace nuclear, and I'm afraid it does need government support.
Oh.
You can't do it without And in fact, an awful lot of the things, the reasons that the US is on top technologically has been because of government programs, mainly Defense Department programs. And those have been cut by half. Research has been cut by half. We need to bring that back. And we need government support for nuclear energy development. China's doing it. They're developing nuclear energy. And
well, I mean, the facts are we need the grid to monitor. I mean, that's where I see what I think is going to happen. I think Trump's going to win re-election. I think he and Nancy and Chuck and Nancy are going to get together and have this massive infrastructure bill. That's what I hope. I'm looking. I think both sides can get along with that. And I don't want to get into tonight with but in terms of modern monetary theory, I'm not all that. I think it's somewhat wishful thinking. But anyway, at the end of the day, I can see a middle ground there, and I don't even know if Pelosi will still be around, but this massive infrastructure bill, which would be huge, and that would solidify a lot of. It's good. I mean, Eisenhower Highway took government spending. I mean, that's some of this stuff has to happen. And yet, if you want to have where I can turn the lights on, we're not going to have these little localized communities with solar photovoltaic panels where it's just not going to happen. So, anyway, we'll see. But I think that'd be a huge bipartisan gesture on both sides to have this massive infrastructure. That's my hope, at least, for sure.
Yeah. I think that there, some solar is, it's happening. It's going to happen. There's one reason I don't like it very much, and that's because the reason that I've been an environmentalist for many years is because I was long ago what was called a deep ecologist. But this is you can't hold these positions anymore, because deep ecology believed there should be no more than 100 million people on Earth. And
I think we blew through that.
Because you want it to to be wilderness.
Is that an Ehrlich thing, like from Paul Ehrlich? Is that one of his babies?
No. This is before. No. He didn't. He warned that there might not be more because people were going to die from
starvation.
He was, it was one of these. Let's say it was one of these self-canceling prophecies. It wasn't because of him, but because of the concern that there wouldn't be enough food. We were developing at the same time, and he should have known it, we were developing the science that wound up tripling the yields of rice and grains and so on. And so now suddenly, it looked at the time like we weren't going to have enough food for the population, but now it's no worry, because
and on top of that, it was worried about global cooling back then in the 70s too. That's a fact. People want to say we weren't. They were. It was cold, and people were worried about it. I don't get why people get so like. It's okay to say, hey, we were wrong. It's good. We didn't have global cooling. We did not have to. We did not have mass starvation, other than through government dictate. But other than that, we've actually.
Well, the cooling thing was a concern about what would happen after a nuclear war, that it would cause cooling. That was the issue. And at that time, there wasn't much recognition, although there was recognition of the science of global warming. But I don't know, it hadn't happened much yet. And it hadn't been brought to people's attention, but then it got brought to people's attention. And in fact, the science is that the greenhouse gases do prevent escape of infrared radiation into outer space. And so all other things being equal, the Earth would warm. All other things aren't equal. You get feedback loops.
Exactly, right. Equal, right.
So all the complicated computer programs are trying to deal with the feedback loops.
Right.
So is warming going to cause more warming, or is it going to cause a feedback that results in less warming? And well, you get both.
Right.
So what's the upshot? And the computer programs say the upshot is you get more warming. So they project, and I believe these. I think they're, you know, they're done by scientists. The scientists write stuff that says we think this is what's going to happen. We're not sure for a certain probability. They don't even quantify probabilities because they don't want to over quantify. They'll say this is more likely, this is less likely. But then somebody writes you know, the political
Yes, the
summary.
headline porn, exactly. It's headline porn, yeah.
Yeah, and that changes.
But then you got a clown like freaking Michael Mann, though, too. You know what I'm saying? And here's this guy with his fake hockey stick, and he's guys like, it's kind of like in our business. I mean, I'm just a financial planner. You know what I'm saying? But when there are people who bring down the entire business of, you know, the Phil Jones of East Anglia Climate Research Unit. These guys were all in cahoots in terms of trying to push a false narrative. And essentially, guys say, I take everybody with a skepticism now. I said, wait a second, you guys knew this was happening, where they're trying to hide the decline, and you didn't say anything about it. Now I'm going to believe what you're saying about it going forward, because you guys have been saying the same, regurgitating the same, just insanity for years. And there was global cooling warnings back in the 1970s, Michael. I mean, we have lots of evidence that says, look, here's some articles that show what the global cooling was. And it wasn't just around nuclear war. It's just about facts the temperatures are cold. People are like, what the hell is going on? And it turns out that they're wrong, but that's okay. We're better off for it, if you ask me. So on the solar photovoltaic, so I mean, I want to talk about solar, you know, PV, not thermal. I'm talking about PV. All these people seem to think it's just around the block, and I'm sitting there thinking, until we get the batteries, it doesn't mean crap. There just is not. You cannot. And wind is. I just want to talk about solar. What's your stake or thinking on the battery? Because until we can store electricity in a pretty continuous way with baselines, solar and wind too, but solar in particular, it's not going to do what we need to do because we don't have the battery technology. So where's your thinking on that in terms of?
Well, you need to combine all these things. Okay, so I think so for it's, you know, quote unquote zero carbon or low carbon emissions, you need you need nuclear. Okay, we've agreed on that. Do you need, okay, do you really need solar and wind? Well, won't talk about whether we really need them. We do need them, of course, for some uses. You see them on the highway, remote places. You want to have a light. You have a little solar panel, so you need it for some things. Now, if it's cheap enough, then it will make sense on people's roofs, and we may have more of that. I started out, I went off on a tangent on the deep ecology thing, because what sent me there was thinking I don't want the whole earth to be covered with, or I don't want too much of the earth to be covered with solar panels
or wind turbines, exactly.
Wind turbines, because I want them to. I want my wilderness. You know, we may not have any wilderness anymore, but I want us to have as close as we can to it, and that's not going to help. But solar panels on rooftops and things like that, I think this is likely. This is happening. There's lots of it in Australia.
But it's not going to do much of a dent in terms of the overall need because of the lack of storage. That's what I'm trying. I mean, I love it. I think it's great. I would get some, but
if you have backup, then you don't need storage. So if you have nuclear plants that can operate variably,
I completely agree. Could not agree more. You and I tell you, I could not agree more. That's the issue. You got to have some kind of backup, unless we have batteries, and people don't want to have nuclear or fossil fuels. Then you're sitting there, well, what are you going to do? You know, I mean,
so it's an interesting field, I think, because you need to combine all of these things, and you need to, there's a there's a wonderful study done by MIT's nuclear engineering department, where they take a combination, and they have this simulation program, which apparently is, I hate to use the word sophisticated, because you know, it seems to be very, very well done.
Yeah.
Where they combine nuclear, renewables, fossil fuel. They run it with and without fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Storage, which can be, you know, pumped storage. You pump the water up and then you drop it through a hydroelectric plant. So you got extra energy, you pump it up. We had pumped storage in Colorado. But you lose energy that way. You'd rather not do it that way.
Right.
You lose some. And transmission. So you build more transmission. You can, and this is something where I'm afraid I seriously fault the Trump administration, because the institution, the research institution where I worked 40 years ago, it did a study. There was an article published in the Atlantic, and if it's correct, then this is the story. So it did a study on how you could, now of course this NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, they go in for renewable energy, and they probably can't mention nuclear very much for the usual reason. But they do. But this study didn't involve nuclear. It involved wind and solar across the country. And how do you even out the fluctuations? Well, you need transmission. And the Western and the Eastern grids don't have enough of a connection. So the study said we need to build up that interconnection so that we can transmit electricity across the country more easily than when the one part has more solar energy, you can transmit it. Apparently the Trump administration said, get rid of that, because it doesn't promote coal. This, you know, I mean, this really makes
get rid of the actual transmission.
The study, get rid of
the study itself. Okay.
You know, don't publicize that study, according to the Atlantic article, because we want the backup to be piles of coal at coal-fired plants. And this is, you know, so.
Yeah, that's the issue though. When, you know, Hillary and Barack and Biden said we're going to put these coal miners out and there won't be any more fracking, it's kind of like, you know, the demarcation line has been established that says our guys are for nuclear, coal, and natural gas. You guys are for wind, solar, and hydro. And it's like, I don't understand why there can't be a happy middle there. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it seems nuts to me that I'm not against solar. I think wind is a clown show. I'm not against solar. I'm certainly not against hydro, without question. And I like biomass. I like it all, but I think wind is silly. But I mean, why can't we just make them in the middle and say, let's take the best. It would be better if we didn't burn coal. I know coal is very efficient. I know it's a wonderful thing. I know, but at the end of the day, if we can find a replacement for it, I think most people would be on board with that. I don't get why it has to be such as your side over here, our side over there is the false dichotomy. Michael, all right. So last thing, just we got a couple minutes left because my dog's getting kind of antsy. So just all right. So one thing, go in if you don't mind, just about the Trump. So I know you don't like the way he talks and the bullying, but just you said he's been worse than you would have thought. Just elaborate on that if you would, because that was of interest to me. I was like, why? I mean, I don't get it. So explain that if you don't mind. I'm just going to show.
Well, okay. So my view is you know, I mean, it comes from a lot of things I read. So do I read the liberal press? Perhaps. But as I say, I've read the National Review, although I kind of shifted to these people who left the National Review, the Dispatch, and there I really very much agree, but they don't like Trump. You know, it's the worst has been, it seems to me, the better people who have left. He hires people. He seems to believe only in loyalty. not in some sort of agenda or on the virus. Okay, the trouble is there's differing views about should you lock down, does it make sense? There's cost benefit analysis there.
Yeah.
His blaming China thing, I've read, this comes from presumably from this document, the parties they hire at very high cost, these political strategy firms, and the political strategy document, I read it. I didn't read it all, but it's 87 pages. And it has one thing, I can't remember what firm, but it's a political strategy firm that recommends this is what the Republican strategy should be for re-election of Trump, as well as other Republicans. There is one and only one italicized phrase in it, and for emphasis. It reads, "Don't defend Trump, blame China." I think this is nonsense. I mean, China, yeah, okay, it's not a liberal in the old sense government. It's authoritarian. There's some advantages to that. It's not as bad as people think. The thing about the Uyghurs is not as bad as people think, and it's not as bad as, say, Saudi Arabia imposing on Yemen, but we don't, for some reason, we don't demonize Saudi Arabia. We demonize China because, why? Probably because it's beating us. It's, it wouldn't have beaten us
competition. That's our competitor. You know what I'm saying?
It wouldn't have been beating us so badly if we hadn't cut back on government-sponsored R&D, which I think it's half what it used to be, and I think we need that. We needed it for nuclear energy, to keep nuclear energy alive, and we need it for other things too. But Chinese people are smart. They work very hard, and they adopted, starting in the 70s, a market-oriented, a kind of a hybrid approach that has worked. It's unbelievable. It's brought, the Chinese people used to be so unbelievably poor.
Yeah, I know.
Even in the 80s and early 90s, I was on the board of an organization that was working to alleviate poverty among very poor farmers, people who earn less than $2 a day. And I even went to China once for a project to the poorest part of China. It's kind of a project, didn't work out, but anyway. And I remember reading, there were some statistics on the amount of land owned by poor farmers in different places in the world. In China, they owned just like a postage stamp. Hundreds of millions of people owned almost no land, and they were subsistence farmers, very, very poor. That has changed. I mean, is life better? Okay, so they work in factories. Is that better? Hard to say, but they're less poor, and they
I remember growing up when I was a kid, Mike. My mom said, "You better clear your plate. They're starving in China." You know what I'm saying? Literally starving in China. Now you don't say that anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Talk about illogic. That's not logical.
Well, she was a liberal. You know what I'm saying? So
okay, that explains it. Okay.
You clear your plate. They're starving in China. Okay.
So send it to China. Why should I? What good will it do them for me to eat it?
That's that. Yeah. Never thought about it like that. That is true. Not a logical argument.
Yeah. So none of us, I mean, we can all, no matter how hard we try, we'll find something that we believe that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, on MMT, the best thing that I wrote, the article I wrote, I think says it all. Its basic tenets are, everybody agrees. That's true. I mean, if you're the issuer of the currency, you can issue as much as you want.
Right.
Okay, yes, you can't issue too much because of inflation. Okay, yeah, that's what MMT says, and yes, everybody agrees with that. But
Right.
then MMT, at least Stephanie Kelton, goes on to say, "Oh,
Right.
look at all the things we can spend money on now that we know that we're not constrained." Wait a minute, you said we're constrained by inflation.
Right.
Okay, so
Then on top of that, where does it stop? You know what I'm saying? Like, oh yeah, it was,
yeah,
that was the
yeah. Well, she says where it stops, but the trouble is it's very hard to implement that.
that's what I'm saying. You can say that all day long, Stephanie, but now we're going to get a politician say, nope, no more. That's not going to happen. But
Yeah. So read my review, because some people have said this is the only thing that really gets this MMT right.
no, I'm glad you wrote that. I did read that. I've forgotten about that. I will read it again because it wasn't that long ago. You had written, if I recall.
Yeah, it wasn't long ago,
Like
and
in June, I think it was in June when you had written it, and because it's easy to fall. It's easy to get the idea of MMT working. But the whole thing that comes to me is, when does it stop? And just for someone to say, some economics professor from some small liberal arts school in New York, say now it's time to stop. Like, yeah, it's not going to work. And then next thing you know,
and she thinks Congress should do it, and that you can't depend on that. They're not, all the pressure on them is to spend more, tax less. So yeah,
that's the it's funny because now I'll let you go, but when I was in college, I studied the Austrian School of Economics, and one of the guys there was saying, of all the the people we should not like, Pinochet is probably our favorite, simply because he had his hand on the not being a tyrannical dictator, but at least he allowed for some sort of freedom while he was able to pull the lever when it needed to be stopped. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like the same thing with China. China says, look, we're gonna have the government do these things kind of against the will, so we get all that. But you can't allow Congress, because Congress, their whole point is to raise money, get reelected. They're not going to get reelected if they're trying to stop the flow of cash to their districts. That's just a fact. And so they're not going to stand in the way of free money for their constituents. That's all there is to it. So
yeah, the pressure's too great. Yeah.
It's one of those human dilemmas we have. Like, we want freedom, but then again, do we? Because anyway, Michael, I gotta take him out. He's up on me. Man, this has been great. I tell you, I've enjoyed this immensely. Prediction for 2020. What's your prediction? You think for Senate, for President, and House? What do you think?
All I can do is go with what I read in the polls. So I think Biden will win. I think the Democrats will take the Senate. I don't know. I mean, the Economist says 2/3 probability the Democrats will win the Senate, and okay, then what? So the question is, then what? And that I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if Trump wins, I hope for what you say, okay? Because maybe it will. Maybe he'll change. Okay, maybe he'll change. He needs to change. Okay.
My concern is Trump is not a conservative. So the concern for the conservatives, National View in particular, has always been Trump is not a conservative, and at some point he's going to let the conservatives down. I don't think that to be. We'll see. We'll see if he gets reelected. But
he's not anything. I mean, he's not. I've never met anybody. I've known people kind of like Trump, and I get into big clashes with him. Yeah. I mean, I've had two incidents where I was kind of working for somebody like that, and I just said, "You're just a liar." I mean, they said, "Could you please leave?"
Well, I predict Trump wins, and I do think the Senate's probably go 50-50. I think the Republicans will lose a couple seats. The House will retain itself, and Democrats, they'll probably lose a couple seats, but I think it'll still be a Democrat majority in the House, 50-50, like it was in 2000 and was it 2002? I can't remember when. No, I think it was 2004. Was it 50 when Arlen Specter flipped? I can't remember. But anyway, that was 2008. I can't remember. But I think the Democrat will will retain the House. They'll pick up seats in the Senate. It'll be 50-50, and then Trump will win, and then it will have a. It's just going to be just nothing. we got to get rid of gerrymandering in the House. That's the evil thing. I mean, gerrymandering in the House is bad, and that's we got to get rid of it. And I hope that cooler. It's real quick. It's funny. I heard a couple of Democrat senators say that they think an 18-year term on Supreme Court would be the way to go. I like that. I like that idea instead of having all this insanity that goes on now. I mean, why? I mean, Thomas and Ginsburg have been on there since the early 90s, before there was even like a real World Wide Web. I mean, why are these this nuts? So I hope that there'll be more, and I'm not a middle of the road moderate. I just think I hope there'll be more common ground. But anyway, Michael, it's been great. I'll post this tomorrow, and a lot of people say thanks for being on here for sure. I'm just looking at the comments. They say thanks. It was fun, and maybe we can do it again after the election. See what it looks like.
Okay, sure.
This guy right here. If you can only smell his breath, he is ready to go to the bathroom. Michael, have a good day. We'll see you later, man. Hey,
okay, thanks, Josh. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for y'all being here tonight, everybody. We'll see you guys.